The day I buried my son, I thought grief would be my only battle. I thought once the last handful of earth was laid over him, the world would give me time to breathe, to cry, to remember him in peace. But life had one more cruelty waiting. She looked at me with eyes I no longer recognized and said, "Stop crying. Pack your bags. Get out." No mercy. No pause. Just a sentence that ended everything. The room fell silent. All around me, people were whispering prayers, hugging, crying quietly, but I couldn't hear a thing. It was as if the world had faded, and all that existed were those words echoing in my head. I remember holding the handkerchief my boy once gave me. It still smelled faintly of his cologne. He used to tease me about keeping it in my purse. "Mom, it's just a handkerchief, not gold," he'd say. That day, it felt like gold. The last piece of him I had left. Outside, the sky opened up. Rain fell hard, cold, and steady, tapping against the windows like the world itself was crying. And when everyone else went home, I picked up my small black suitcase, walked out the front door, and into the storm with a heart too heavy to carry. Every step hurt. Those were the same shoes I'd worn to his graduation years ago, the day he'd hugged me and said, "You did it, Mom." Now each step in them sounded like goodbye. But storms don't last forever, and neither did her peace. Before I tell you the rest, let me take a moment to thank you for being here with me. Welcome back, my dear ones, to Granny Stories. And if you're new here, this little space is where I share pieces of real life. Some stories hurt, some heal, but all remind us that even in silence, there's still strength. Where are you watching from tonight? I always love to know. Maybe you're sitting in your living room. Maybe you're driving. Maybe you're lying awake because your mind won't stop replaying the past. If that's you, you're not alone. That's why I tell these stories. Because somewhere out there, someone else needs to hear that pain doesn't last forever. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and stay with me. Here, we share truths without shame. And sometimes, when we can't find the words for our own hurt, we borrow someone else's until we heal. If you've ever been betrayed when you were already breaking, or pushed aside when all you wanted was love, stay close, my dear. Because what I learned after that night changed everything I believed about loss, loyalty, and quiet revenge. My name's Evelyn. I'm 67, a retired school secretary, and for most of my life, it was just me and my son. He was my sunshine after I lost his father. Smart, kind, protective. He made the house feel full even when it was just the two of us. He had that kind of laugh that could shake off the darkest day. When he married Clara, I was so happy. I remember thinking, finally, he won't be alone when I'm gone. She was polite at first, brought me flowers, called me Mom, even asked for my recipes. I believed we'd be close, like family should be. But little things changed after the wedding. The phone calls got shorter, the visits stopped coming. And when I did visit, I could feel it. That quiet tension in the air, like my presence was something she had to tolerate, not cherish. She'd smile, but her eyes never followed. I'd talk about Daniel's childhood, and she'd look away, pretending to check her phone. I told myself it was just adjustment, new marriage, new routines, new priorities. That's what mothers do, you know? We make excuses for the people our children love. We convince ourselves it's nothing. But I didn't see the wall she was building. And by the time I did, it was already too late. The morning of the funeral felt like a dream I couldn't wake up from. The kind of dream where you're screaming but no sound comes out. The sky was gray, heavy, like even heaven couldn't bear to watch what was happening below. The church smelled of lilies and rain. That smell still clings to my memories. Sweet, heavy, and full of endings. I remember the wooden pews creaking as people stood and sat, the faint hum of a hymn trying to fill the space that silence left behind. My son's photo sat by the altar, his smile frozen forever. He looked so alive in that picture, so full of light. That same smile used to greet me every Sunday morning when he'd drop by with breakfast. And now, all I had was a frame and a lifetime of echoes. Clara stood beside me in her black dress, her makeup perfect, not a tear in sight. She scrolled through her phone while the priest spoke about Daniel's kindness. I wanted to believe she was checking messages from friends, maybe trying to distract herself from the pain. But deep down, I knew better. I clutched my rosary so tight that the beads left marks in my palm. Each word of prayer trembled out of me like it was borrowed from someone else. When they lowered his casket into the ground, I whispered, "I'll be okay, my boy. You rest now." I meant it, or maybe I was just trying to convince myself. After the burial, people hugged me, told me to stay strong, then drifted away one by one until it was just me and Clara standing under the same gray sky. She didn't say a word, just stared at me, eyes cold as stone. Later that evening, when I went home, the house he and I had built memories in, she was waiting at the door. Her arms were crossed, her voice steady. "This isn't your home anymore," she said. "You have till the end of the week." At first I thought I'd misheard. This was our house, the one Daniel painted himself, where he fixed the kitchen sink at midnight and laughed when the pipe burst. The home where his baby shoes still sat in a box on the top shelf of my closet. And yet, there she was, standing in the doorway like a stranger, guarding something that was never hers. I stared at her, the woman my son loved, and I felt something inside me quietly break. Not with a scream, not with anger, just a still, hollow ache that started in my chest and spread until even breathing hurt. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. There's a kind of pain that makes words useless. I just nodded, turned away, and walked back to my room. I packed one small suitcase, a few clothes, my rosary, and that same handkerchief Daniel had given me years ago. That night, I left. The rain had started again, soft at first, then heavy, and as it fell, I looked up at the sky and whispered, "I'll come back for you, my boy. Not for revenge, for truth." And though I didn't know it yet, that night wasn't an ending. It was the quiet beginning of everything that would follow. The night I left the house, the rain followed me all the way across town. It was past midnight when I found a small room above a bakery, just one bed, a narrow window, and the hum of the city below. The air smelled of sugar and sadness, like sweetness trying to cover up sorrow. The woman who owned the bakery gave me a kind look, but I could tell she didn't want to ask questions. Sometimes grief wears a face people are afraid to see. That first night, I sat on the edge of the bed with my suitcase still closed. I didn't unpack. I just stared at the little lamp on the table, its light flickering on the pale walls. I whispered his name, Daniel, and waited for silence to answer back. Every night after that, I did the same. It became a ritual, a way to feel like I still existed somewhere in his world. Each morning, the smell of warm bread drifted up through the floorboards, reminding me that life went on even when you didn't want it to. But grief has a cruel way of testing your strength. It was a Tuesday when I overheard two women in the bakery talking. They didn't know I was upstairs. Clara moved in her friends already. One of them said, "Changed the locks too. Poor old woman, she didn't waste any time, did she?" I froze. My hands shook. So it was true. She hadn't just taken my son's house, she'd filled it with laughter that didn't belong there, erasing every trace of the life he and I built together. That day, something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger exactly, it was the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm. I sat by the window and looked out at the rain. The street below glistened under the lamplight, and I thought of Daniel, his laugh, his smile, his promise. Then I remembered the last night at the hospital. He was weak, but his hand still held mine with that same steady warmth. He'd looked at me with eyes that knew too much and whispered, "Mama, if anything ever happens to me, call Uncle Reggie." At the time, I didn't understand. I thought he was just trying to comfort me. But as I sat in that tiny room, those words came back clearer than ever, like he was right there beside me, guiding me through the fog of grief. I closed my eyes and took a long breath. That memory, his voice, that promise, lit something inside me. It wasn't just hope, it was direction. For the first time since he was gone, I felt a spark in the darkness. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The bakery downstairs was already alive. The soft thump of dough on wood, the rattle of trays, the faint hum of a radio playing old songs. But I wasn't thinking about bread or breakfast. I was thinking about him, about the one name my son had given me like a key to the truth. I sat at that little wooden table, staring at my phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through old contacts until I found the number. Uncle Reggie. It had been years since we'd spoken, yet it felt like only yesterday he was at my husband's funeral, promising to look after my boy. He was my late husband's closest friend, the kind of man whose word carried weight, whose eyes always saw through the noise. When I finally pressed call, the phone barely rang once before I heard his voice. "Evelyn," he said, calm and steady. "I was expecting your call." For a moment I couldn't breathe. How could he have known? But then again, Reggie always knew. He'd seen enough of life to recognize when the wind was shifting. "I need to see you," I whispered. "I know," he said simply. "I'll be there by evening." And he was. When I opened the door to that tiny room above the bakery, there he stood. A tall man in his 70s with silver hair, a brown coat still damp from the rain, and eyes that held both kindness and purpose. He didn't waste words. He never did. He stepped inside, placed a thick folder on the table, and said softly, "Daniel made sure his mother would never be left out in the cold." I stared at the folder like it was a lifeline. My hands shook as I opened it, the paper edges rough beneath my fingertips. Inside were pages, official stamps, signatures, and my son's handwriting. It was his will, the real one, the one Clara never knew existed. My eyes blurred as I read the words he had written months before he died. He'd listed me, his mother, as the rightful resident of the house, the joint owner of the savings, and the keeper of everything he'd built. He'd written, "For as long as my mother lives, she shall have peace in her home." I pressed my palm against that line and felt my chest loosen for the first time since the funeral. The grief was still there, but something new joined it, a quiet, steady heartbeat of justice. Reggie leaned back in his chair and looked at me. "He trusted me to hold on to this until you were ready," he said. "Now it's time to set things right." I nodded slowly, my tears falling onto the papers, blurring the ink of my son's name. For weeks, I had felt like a ghost. But at that moment, I felt alive again, fueled not by anger, but by the promise my son had left behind. That night, I didn't whisper his name before bed. I whispered, "Thank you, my boy." Because now I knew, my silence wasn't weakness, it was strength, waiting for its moment. The next morning, Reggie spread the papers across the small table by the window. The sunlight slipped through the curtains, landing right on my son's signature, as if heaven itself was pointing me toward the truth I'd been too broken to see. He spoke calmly, the way only men who have seen decades of storms can. "Evelyn, your son was careful. Everything, the deed, the business accounts, even the investment shares, they're all still under his name." He tapped one paper gently, his finger resting on a highlighted line. "And this part," he said, "is the one that matters most." I leaned closer. The words blurred at first through my tears, but when I finally read them, my breath caught. "This home shall remain with my mother for the rest of her life." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. I just stared at that sentence, each word wrapping around me like an embrace from my son himself. The sound of the city below faded away, the ticking of the clock disappeared, and all I could hear was Daniel's voice in my heart, calm, steady, protective as ever. Reggie looked at me, waiting. "Now," he said, "we make it official. We file this, we bring it before the court, and we do it quietly. She won't see it coming." I nodded. My hands trembled as he handed me a pen. The papers felt heavy, not from their weight, but from what they meant. When I signed my name beside my son's, my heart felt both broken and whole at the same time. The grief was still there, it would always be. But it shifted. It no longer pressed down on me. It lifted me, straightened my spine, and reminded me who I was before the world tried to turn me into a victim. Reggie smiled faintly as he gathered the documents. "You've got your footing again," he said. "That's the first step." I looked out the window at the people walking below, their umbrellas blooming against the drizzle, and for the first time since the funeral, the world didn't look cruel. It looked open, waiting. I turned back to Reggie and said softly, "You know, she thinks she's won." He chuckled, that quiet, knowing kind of laugh. "Let her. The quiet ones always surprise them." That evening, after he left, I sat by the window holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The streetlights flickered on, and I caught my reflection in the glass. There were lines of loss around my eyes, but behind them, something new, something fierce. I thought of all the years I'd spent taking care of others, making peace, avoiding fights, trusting that kindness was enough. But life had taught me another truth. Sometimes peace isn't handed to you. Sometimes you have to take it back. I looked down at the folder lying on the table, Daniel's name shining under the soft light, and I whispered, "You kept your promise, my boy." That night, I didn't cry. For the first time, I slept without tears, because I knew, deep down, I wasn't just a grieving mother anymore. I was a woman about to reclaim her peace. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of that house again. The same house I had walked away from with a suitcase and a heart in pieces. The sky looked exactly as it had that night. Gray, heavy, and restless, like even the wind remembered what happened here. But this time I wasn't alone. Reggie stood beside me, his coat collar turned up against the chill, a brown envelope tucked neatly under his arm. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. We didn't need to. The truth was walking with us. As we stepped onto the porch, I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I'd imagined this moment 100 times, but I promised myself I wouldn't let anger lead me. This wasn't about revenge, it was about restoration, the kind my son would have wanted. When I rang the bell, it echoed through the house like a memory. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then the door opened. Clara stood there, her hair perfectly styled, a cup of coffee in one hand. But when she saw me, the color drained from her face. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. Finally, she managed a shaky, "What are you doing here?" Before I could speak, Reggie stepped forward with the calm of a man who'd been preparing for this moment all his life. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Turner," he said, his voice polite but firm. He held out the envelope and placed it gently in her hand. "Court order." She blinked, confused, trying to process his words. This can't be real," she whispered, flipping through the pages as her hands began to tremble. I watched her expression shift from disbelief to panic. For a woman who'd built her comfort on lies, the truth was burning through her fingers. I took a slow step forward, my voice steady. Not loud, not cruel, just final. "You told me to pack my bags," I said quietly. "Now it's your turn." She froze. Her eyes darted between Reggie and me, searching for a way out, but there wasn't one. Everything she'd taken, every word she'd used to push me away, was now folding in on her. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just stood there, breathing in the moment, feeling the weight of justice settle softly around me. For months, I had carried silence like a burden. Now it stood beside me, like a shield. Reggie, still calm, spoke again. "You have 14 days to vacate the property. The court has recognized Mrs. Carter as the lawful resident. Any attempt to interfere will result in further legal action." His tone was almost gentle, as if he pitied her. Clara's eyes glistened, but no tears came. She opened her mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Her voice, the same one that once ordered me out of my own home, had finally lost its power. I stepped past her into the hallway, the familiar smell of furniture polish and jasmine still lingering. Every inch of that house held a memory of my son. And for the first time since his death, those memories didn't ache. They felt like home, calling me back. I turned slightly, looking at her one last time. "I don't hate you," I said softly, "but I hope you learn what it feels like to stand alone in a house built on lies." She didn't reply. She just stood there, silent, watching as Reggie and I walked further inside. The air in that house felt different, lighter somehow. The ticking of the hallway clock, the sound of my footsteps on the floorboards, it all felt like time finally catching up, like every wrong moment had led exactly here. I'd never felt silence so powerful. It didn't need to shout. It already said everything that needed to be said. The days that followed moved slower than winter mornings. Every sunrise felt heavy, but I woke with purpose now. No longer the woman hiding above a bakery, but a mother fighting with quiet grace. Reggie filed the papers. One by one, he prepared the documents, each page stamped with the weight of truth. And then came the hearings. Cold rooms, long benches, the smell of coffee and nerves. I sat there, dressed in black, my rosary wrapped around my fingers like armor. Clara arrived every time with new stories, different lies, different tears. She said I'd manipulated my son, that I'd tricked him into writing that will when he was too sick to think straight. At first, her words stung. Not because I feared them, but because it was the same tone she used the day she threw me out. Confident, entitled, so sure she'd already won. But documents don't lie, and neither do the dead when they've left their truth in ink. Reggie laid everything out before the judge. The original signatures, the dates, the business transactions still under Daniel's name. Every page felt like my son speaking from beyond the grave. And with each one, Clara's voice grew smaller, her arguments weaker. There was a moment during one hearing when she looked at me, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of herself, fear of losing everything she'd taken without gratitude. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The truth had a voice of its own now, louder than anything I could have said. When the final day came, I remember the judge looking over his glasses, his tone calm, deliberate. Based on the evidence presented, he said, the property, assets, and accounts in question legally and rightfully belonged to Mrs. Evelyn Carter. The gavel struck. That sharp sound filled the room like thunder. I closed my eyes and felt the air leave my lungs, not from exhaustion but relief. Reggie reached over, touched my hand, and whispered, "It's done." I nodded, whispering back, "Rest easy, Daniel. Your mother's home again." As we walked out of that courtroom, the sun broke through the clouds. It was faint, barely there, but after everything, it felt like a sign. A small, quiet light reminding me that justice doesn't always come roaring in. Sometimes it walks in softly, holding nothing but a stack of papers and the truth. When I finally turned the key and stepped inside, the door creaked the same way it always had. Only this time, it didn't sound lonely. The afternoon sun poured through the window, spilling across the mantel, landing perfectly on the photo of my son. His smile, frozen in that frame, seemed to look right back at me. Proud, peaceful, like he already knew I'd made it home. The air inside was heavy at first, stale with months of bitterness and silence. I set my purse down and opened every window, one by one. The curtains lifted gently with the breeze, carrying the scent of fresh rain through the rooms. It felt like the house itself was exhaling, letting go of all the darkness it had been forced to hold. I walked slowly from room to room, my hand brushing the walls, tracing over old memories like they were living things. The corner of the living room where Daniel took his first steps. The hallway where his laughter used to echo when I'd chase him with a towel after bath time. The kitchen where he once spilled flour everywhere trying to bake me a birthday cake. Each spot felt alive again, not with grief this time, but with gratitude. I dusted the furniture, wiped the frames, and swept the floor. Not because the house was dirty, but because I wanted to claim it again. To make it ours again. Every stroke of the cloth felt like a prayer. A quiet thank you for what was lost and what had been returned. That evening, Reggie stopped by, just like he promised. He carried a small tin of biscuits and 2 cups of tea, and though his hands were steady, his eyes looked softer than usual. He set the tray down, and for a while, neither of us spoke. We just sat, him in the old armchair, me on the sofa, listening to the slow, familiar ticking of the wall clock. The same clock that once measured out my loneliness now counted peace instead. I looked at him and said, "You know, it doesn't feel empty anymore." He smiled, that kind of smile that doesn't need words. "It's not," he said. "It's yours again, and you've earned every bit of it." The sunlight faded, leaving behind a soft golden glow across the room. I leaned back, holding my cup, and for the first time in months, the quiet didn't hurt. It comforted me. The silence that once haunted me now felt like a hymn. That night, as I walked down the hallway to my room, I stopped by Daniel's photo one last time. I touched the glass and whispered, "We did it, sweetheart. The house is home again." And as I turned off the light, I realized it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. It had been a month since the court's ruling, a quiet, steady month filled with morning light, the sound of the clock, and peace that finally stayed. I'd started tending the small garden again, trimming the roses my son planted years ago. They'd begun to bloom, bright and defiant, as if they too had been waiting for the storm to pass. One afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. A soft, hesitant sound. Nothing like the sharp, commanding one that once set me out into the rain. When I opened it, there she was, Clara. She looked different. Smaller somehow. The confidence she once wore like perfume was gone. Her eyes were red, her voice trembling when she said, "I'm sorry." She stood there clutching her hands together, like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. "I was angry," she whispered. "I thought I'd lost everything." For a long moment, I just watched her. Really saw her. Not the woman who'd hurt me, but the broken girl standing in her place. I saw her fear, her guilt, her confusion. And for a fleeting second, I saw myself. Years ago, after my husband died, standing in the same kind of emptiness, trying to make sense of a world that didn't care about my pain. "I don't hate you," I said softly, "but I can't let you hurt me again." Her shoulders dropped, as if she'd been holding her breath all this time. Tears rolled down her cheeks, quiet and unrestrained. She nodded, unable to say more. Then she turned and walked away, the gravel crunching under her feet, each step sounding like the end of a long, bitter song. I stood there for a moment, watching her fade into the distance. No anger, no satisfaction, just a calm stillness that settled deep in my chest. When I closed the door, I did it gently, not out of spite, but peace. That door had seen enough of pain and shouting. It deserved to close softly this time. I leaned against it for a moment and whispered, "Let it be, Daniel. Let it all finally rest." The sun dipped low outside and light spilled across the living room one last time, warm and quiet like a blessing. And just like that, the chapter ended, not with revenge, but with release. You know, my dear ones, after everything that's happened, I've learned something I want to share with you. Silence is not weakness. It's not surrender. Sometimes silence is power wrapped in grace, the kind of strength people never see coming. When the world pushes you out, don't chase it. When people shut you out of their hearts or their homes, don't beg to be let back in. Because the truth, when it's real and steady, always finds its way home, even if it takes time. There's a certain peace in knowing you didn't have to raise your voice to be heard, that you didn't have to fight ugly to win with dignity. That's what this story taught me. It taught me that calm can be louder than chaos. And that a quiet woman holding her head high can shake more walls than one shouting in anger. Ladies, never hand your dignity to anyone. Not even family. You can forgive, you can let go, but don't let anyone take your worth. Because once you lose that, you lose the part of you that knows how to rise again. If you're listening right now and something in my story feels familiar, if you've ever had to stand your ground quietly with no one clapping for you, I want to hear your story. Tell me in the comments. You never know who might find courage in your words. Your truth matters more than you think. It's not just a story. It's someone else's hope waiting to be heard. Thank you, my dear ones, for staying with me until the end. If my story reminded you that strength doesn't always roar, that sometimes it whispers softly through calm hearts and steady hands, then I hope you carry that with you tonight. If this story touched you, please subscribe, share it, and tell me what lesson it left in your heart. Your support means more than you know. Every time you comment or share, this little family grows, a place where stories like ours find light again. Sometimes the gentlest revenge is simply surviving with grace. Sometimes the sweetest victory is walking away with peace instead of anger. Good night, my friends. And remember, silence can be the loudest answer of all. Rest well, and may your peace always be louder than their noise.